Kicking off the list at number 10, Poltergeist. The case that inspired the 1982 classic Poltergeist. Yeah, these things are real, apparently. Back in 1958, the Herman house in New York would never be the same ever again after this one fateful day. James Herman from Long Island got a phone call one night from his wife, Lucille. She tells him that bottles of different substances had their lids popped off. In different rooms, there were different jars and different bottles, whatever the case was, just lids were just popping off in random rooms. She heard the popping and had to go check it out for herself. One of the items was a vial of holy water. Herman told the family to stay calm, you know, there's probably a reasonable explanation for everything going on. The classic dad move. Less than a week goes by, it happens again, but this time, Herman witnessed it. Bottles in his bathroom began moving around by themselves by some force. The police came, no explanation. Then a priest came along as well, nothing changed. Lucille Herman claims that she still hasn't seen Poltergeist, and to be fair, I wouldn't watch that movie either. The Herman's house inspired the movie with weird happenings and such, but there weren't any skeletons jumping out of pools, you know? There weren't any skeletons attacking the family. Lucille also said that she hadn't seen it because she had her own nightmare. The actress who played Diane, Jo Beth Williams, in the movie Poltergeist, said in an interview that while they were filming, she would have to go into a huge tank of what she thought were plastic skeletons and like muddy water. She later found out that these bones were in fact real human bones. Because yeah, at the time, human bones were cheaper. Production saw nothing wrong with this idea. Nice, that's horrible. So she spent like 5 days filming with human bones. I'm gonna be sick. That's the worst thing I've ever read. Number 9, the Snedeker House. This is a classic Ed and Lorraine Warren ghost story. It was the main inspiration of the Haunting in Connecticut movie. Ed and Lorraine got a call from owners of the home saying that their son was experiencing personality changes. Now at first, maybe you'd laugh at that call if you were on the other end. Maybe he's just growing up, maybe he's moody, whatever, you know. This was not the case at all. These changes were violent in nature, and on top of that, and another pretty obvious issue in the home, they were seeing apparitions just all around their house. Son's acting odd, and also, we have ghosts. There's one right there, look at it. So Ed and Lorraine were of course interested in what was going on. Old house in Southington, Connecticut, Alan and Carmen Snedeker then found these tools. Old tools used by morticians in their home. Yep, their home was once upon a time a funeral parlor. One day when Carmen was mopping the floor, it turned bloody red all of a sudden and it began to smell foul. So there was a lot of happenings going on. Ed and Lorraine came to one conclusion: demons. Number 8, the Villisca House. Skeptics have left believers. It's always nice to see that line on a website about a haunted house. You're like, cool, debit, I guess. Okay, where to start with this one? It goes back to June 10th, 1912. The Moore family was sadly killed, but it's a crime that has still never been solved. Not saying that ghosts did it, that's disrespectful. I'm not saying that this horrible crime was done by a ghost or anything spooky. This was somebody who got away with it, and it's horrible. But afterwards, the house, as you would assume, turned into some sort of an attraction. Guests would end up paying hundreds of dollars to stay at this place. Why do people do this? A paranormal investigator stayed there back in 2014 and then afterwards ended up taking his own life after just one night there. Whatever's going on here, just leave it alone. That's my opinion. Number 7, Mudhouse Mansion. Coming from Fairfield County, Ohio, the Mudfield Mansion was built a while back, so it's so old it's actually debated when exactly it was built. Best guess so far is that it was built around the mid-1800s. Good time for ghosts. I've heard those are great ghost years. The building was demolished, so if you're thinking about grabbing a flashlight and Ouija board, sit your butt down, mister. It's gone. It was last sold to the Hartman family back in 1920s, but come the 30s, it was completely abandoned. So the ghost stories naturally came in. More than fair, it looks haunted. Ghost stories would naturally come about just walking by that place. I included this one today on our list because this is where the Bloody Mary urban legend all kicked off. A family moved in, or at least tried to, when after they were seen unboxing everything, they all just suddenly vanished. Locals were curious who the new arrivals were and why they were so quiet right after they just moved in, but eventually police went to go check on them and they were just gone. They were just not there. This property is loaded with numerous urban legends just like that. The locals don't miss it at all. Like I said, it was demolished in 2015. RIP, see you later, ghost house. Bye, Bloody Mary. Number 6, 455A Sackett Street. Not to be confused with 221B Baker Street, 455A Sackett Street is a haunted apartment in Brooklyn. So no, it's not Sherlock's apartment. Imagine moving to the big city, okay, New York, a busy city that's known for being loud, for being active. And on top of that, and not being able to sleep, now you have ghosts. One lady who grew up in the apartment experienced these hauntings herself. Fires would just start randomly, there'd be loud bangs in other rooms. All around just bad vibes, which given what I said seems more than fair. Sightings were common of apparitions, but it was always the same female looking spirit. It was always seen via a mirror. And that, my friends, is why I don't look into mirrors ever. Number 5. haunted hotel. I knew tons of people who enjoy staying at a hotel. Like, it's cozy. I'm not one of those people, okay? I don't like hotels. Every time I'm in one, I'm always way too cold. I always think it's haunted. I'm shivering the entire night. If it was the Hotel Monte Vista in Flagstaff, Florida, however, it would for sure be haunted. When it first opened in 1927, it was home to speakeasies, gambling, just shady stuff at the time. A lot of smoke in a lot of rooms, Peaky Blinders and all that kind of stuff. Many of these rooms were haunted, of course, or it wouldn't be on this list. Specifically, the room 220. The TV would change channels by itself. Guests have felt cold hands touch their body at night. See, already at this point, I'm out. See ya. I'd get untucked and I'd be out of the door. Sometimes guests would also hear knocking on the door in the middle of the night with a small, faint voice on the other end announcing room service. I would throw up. I'd look through the door and go, oh, no one's there, and then immediately puke on all of my shoes. This is why I don't do hotels. Number 4, castle spirit. This one is the most recent, so buckle up. Tony Ferguson was filming a castle in England. He was admiring the old beauty of this castle, but when the 33-year-old looked back on his footage, he first thought that he missed out on a prank. He laughed at first, looking at this footage. He couldn't believe what he saw. Check it out. Is this ghost figure moving behind the window? Is this a person? What's going on here? This was at Hurst Castle in Hampshire. He also recalls that nobody could have moved around in that space at all. This wasn't the first time the spirit has visited that place. A time before, Tony said at first when he saw it, it was like this white mist, but then other accounts, it's like a white clay kind of fog looking. It changes forms, basically. It's definitely a ghost. I was asking to show itself and the white mist flew straight at my camera. I mean, this time around, you got footage of something moving. Whatever it is, it's in a video. I get more creeped out. It's harder to fake when it's a video, basically, that's for sure. What are your thoughts? Is this convincing? It's kind of convincing. Number 3, Raynham Hall. This one is a classic. If you haven't seen this photo, really, honestly, good for you. You've made it this far, you're lucky. This is one of the only convincing ghost photos that I've seen. Raynham Hall, England. Okay, this tale kicked off back in 1936 after a photo went around through Country Life magazine. Pretty much a viral photo back in 1936, and it's haunting. It's a spirit wearing a brown gown, and it's casually just floating down a staircase. Legend has it the spirit is that of one Dorothy Townshend. She was the sister of Robert Walpole, the first Prime Minister of Britain back in 1676. Some reports say the image is a result of a long exposure gone wrong. Honestly, either way, I don't want to know. This is terrifying to look at. Number 2. The demonic boy. It doesn't matter where or when, but odds are you've definitely seen this photo at some point. Normally you want to find something that looks fake about a haunted photo, but with this one, it's kind of tough. This photo was taken inside the Amityville house in 1976. It's a young boy with glowing white eyes. It was taken with an automatic camera that was equipped with infrared, and it makes it even creepier how the boy looks like he's peeking around the corner. A photographer named Gene Campbell took it, and Gene was working with paranormal investigators, you guessed it, Ed and Lorraine Warren at this time. This photo was revealed 3 years after it was taken on the Merv Griffin show, and many believe this is the ghost of John DeFeo, one of the boys who lived there prior during that 1974 event. We're still trying to cover this. What do you guys think? Elaborate hoax, or perhaps this photo is one solid piece of evidence that the Amityville house is indeed haunted? And finally, number 1, the Shining hotel spirit. I saw The Shining once when I was younger, and nope, not for me, my friends. I couldn't understand that horror movies were just movies, right? So that one did a number on my young brain. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado is now quite famous for its use in the Stanley Kubrick 1980 classic, The Shining. With the lodge being over 100 years old, it has a pretty decent chance of actually being haunted in real life, let's be honest. They have spirit tours, which are usually just for tourists, whatever, but when Jay Mosling was on one of these tours, they snapped a few pics of random areas. The classic, flash on, of course. After the trip, he was going through the photos and he found this gem. It appears to be a spirit, or demon, ghost, apparition, something that's horribly scary and floating, and it also has long black hair, it appears. The room was of course empty at the time this photo was taken, and honestly, I kind of believe that. Can't just snap photos of random people. That's, what's that called? Oh, a crime. You gotta go chill in the broom closet by yourself and just wind up a disposable camera. That's what ghost hunting's all about. I'm taking notes from Jay. He's doing this whole thing correctly.
Coming in at number 10, we have Julia. Julia is my sister's name. Also, on the day of scripting this video, it is her birthday, so happy birthday, Julia. The best human alive, bar none. This story is not about my sister though, and while I'm sure I've made the odd demonically possessed joke about her in our youth, she most definitely is free of the devil. The Julia in this story, however, is filled with him. Apparently. A Yale graduate and self-expressed man of science, Dr. Richard Gallagher, experienced a possession so dastardly that it had him question his beliefs. The Ivy League educated, board-certified psychiatrist who teaches at Columbia University and the New York Medical College came across a woman named, you guessed it, Julia. Well, that's what we're calling her, anyway. She was a strange woman with flowing black clothes and gothic makeup. She proclaimed herself queen of a satanic cult, but she had approached a priest because she was worried that she was possessed. Gallagher said that objects would fly off shelves around her and she knew odd details about Gallagher's life. The professor said that Julia started appearing to him even when she wasn't there. Creepy. Coming into number 9, bear with me on the pronunciation here, we have the Uimata Makutu lifting. It was a mouthful. In 2009, a teenage girl died and another had her eyes gouged out during a Maori exorcism performed by her relatives who believed that they were cursed. The teens had stolen a lion statue from outside a pub and therefore were subjected to a several-day-long exorcism despite returning it. The surviving teenager recounted the experience, saying that her family stood around her in a circle in water and her grandparents actually came home and told her to go with peace and love. She arrived at hospital with her eyes oozing blood and claimed that she'd been forced to drink urine and repeatedly was kicked by her family. The lengthy trial of the girl's family members lasted 29 days. It made headlines and caused a lot of controversy as many Maori people supported the practice of Makutu. One uncle and 4 aunts were found guilty of the drowning and abuse. Honestly, so intense. So is demonic possession real or can it easily be faked? Consider this at number 8. That's right, we are talking about Martha Brosier. Martha Brosier lived in the mid-1500s and was accused of fraud after it was suspected that she had actually faked demonic possessions, which at the time did bring her considerable fame. She said she suffered a shortness of breath, she could not stick out her tongue, and she would regularly gnash her teeth together. She'd spasm and complain of voices in her head. How was her fraud discovered? It seems that she was tricked into drinking holy water under the guise of normal water, which reportedly had no effect. Right, so that solves that then. How she was able to speak with her mouth shut in fluent and intelligible French, English and Greek is an utter mystery. Coming into number 7, we have the real exorcism of Emily Rose. So you may have seen the 2005 movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. It's actually on Netflix and it's quite the horror show. The real Emily Rose is a teenager called Anna Elizabeth Mitchell who lived in a very religious kind of upbringing in Bavaria in West Germany. She attended mass twice a week and was raised in a very Catholic environment. Anna Elise, as she was known, suffered from epilepsy and possible schizophrenia. She began hearing voices and she thought that she was going to rot in hell. She claimed that she would have horrifying visions while she was praying. This obviously concerned her religious family and they were convinced that she was possessed. As a result, her condition then worsened. A local priest also came forward and convinced that actually she was a demon. He said there was a demon in her, so he called for an exorcism in 1975. Bishop Strangle, with the permission of Anna Elise's parents, conducted 67 exorcisms on the young woman. Now, Emily did die aged 23 after suffering a year of demonic exorcisms during which she was starved. She contracted pneumonia and she had broken knees from having to kneel so often. It was ruled by courts that her death was preventable, so was she mentally ill or was she possessed? Coming into number 6, we have The Devil Made Me Do It. This is one Ed and Lorraine Warren case that even the pair of spooky investigators who by and large had seen it all were absolutely scared of. The story starts off with an 11-year-old boy named David Glatzel. Along with Catholic priests, the pair were called in to try and rid the boy of demons. Over several days of grueling spiritual work, the group believed that they had exorcised the unwanted spirit. But there was a dramatic twist. The Warrens claimed that the demon actually fled into his brother, 18-year-old Arnes, although they didn't realize at the time. Just months later, Arnie wasn't feeling himself at all, and then one night he killed his landlord in an argument. His defense lawyer argued that he was possessed, and the Warrens were even called in to testify in court. The pair claimed that actually they did believe him to be possessed by none other than the devil. After their testimony, Arnie served just 5 years in jail and was released in his mid-20s. We don't actually know where he is now or what he's up to. I don't even know if the devil was ever exorcised from him. Coming into number 5, we have Mademoiselle Elizabeth de Ranfeng. Mademoiselle Ranfeng became a widow in 1617, after which she was heavily courted by her physician, her doctor. It seems that he would buy her gifts, and after she rejected him, he prescribed her a liquid which was later thought to have been a love potion. She started behaving strangely, but the man continued to treat her with potions. It is thought that he infected her with the devil. The ailments that she suffered led people to believe that she was possessed, and she was exorcised in 1619. During her exorcism, it was said that a demon presented itself and spoke in French, Greek, Latin and Hebrew and Italian. the demon was reportedly able to know and recite the thoughts and sins of the various individuals who examined her. The demon was super persistent, but eventually Mademoiselle Ranfang was cured, thankfully. The physician who had slipped her the potions, unfortunately though for him, was burned alive for practicing magic. Cripes, the 17th century was a very intense time, the stakes were very high. Coming into number 4, one of my favourite historical figures I had no idea they'd been exorcised, we have Salvador Dali. I love me a bit of Salvador Dali, especially in the extreme moustache years. The 20th century surrealist artist created some thought-provoking and subversive work, such as The Persistence of Memory and The Lobster Telephone. Hello. The Spanish visionary regularly offended the Catholic Church, and however in his later life the artist did write in defense of the religion, which is, I guess, kind of confusing. Friar Gabriel Maria Berardi claimed to have performed an exorcism on Dali in France in 1947. Allegedly, the artist created a sculpture of Christ and gave it to the friar as a thank you. The man certainly was quirky, but expressly so in the 1930s and early 40s. Perhaps the genius behind his work all along was the devil, but honestly, if I was going to put my money on it, I'd say it was likely the absinthe. Coming into number 3, we have the Tănăacu exorcism. Some nasty things went down in Romania. In June 2005, a nun was crucified in the mountain village of Tănăacu, which, to be honest, what on earth, that's some straight up horror movie stuff, right? Is this the basis for the nun? Sister Irina Konnichi grew up in an orphanage, and following her death, her brother did testify that actually he'd witnessed Satan go into her. It seems that Sister Irina may have been mentally ill, and it was said that she would giggle during mass. It seems that she got into an argument with a 29-year-old priest, Father Chronageu. As a result, he claimed that she was possessed by Satan. Now, she was bound and gagged and exorcised. However, the father claimed that she was beyond salvation. He had her crucified. An article in the Daily Telegraph from 2005 claims that she was found gagged and chained to a cross. After her death, the priest claimed that God had performed a miracle. At her funeral, claps of thunder rang out as the coffin was lowered into the ground, which the priest said was a sign that the will of God had been done. What a nutter, he literally murdered her. Those who were involved in the nun's murder were sentenced to time in jail, but nobody served more than 7 years. If someone crucified me, honestly, I really hope they'd spend the rest of their life in prison. We have a very shocking case at number 2. We have Mother Teresa. Did you know that she was exorcised? Mother Teresa is considered to have been one of the holiest women to have ever lived. The woman received a Nobel Peace Prize, although I will say that other reports say that she was cruel and friends with top leaders of Masonic cults, so I don't know. Mother Teresa fell ill in 1996, breaking her collarbone. Now, months later she contracted malaria and suffered heart failure. It seems that the Archbishop of Calcutta ordered a priest to perform an exorcism because he thought that actually she was under attack by the devil. He said that she was very agitated and removed wires from her body in hospital. She died just a short while later. This is the exorcism case that inspired the movie The Exorcist. Coming into number 1, we have Roland Doe. In the late 1940s, a number of priests performed an exorcism on a boy in the United States. The boy was kept anonymous as he was just 14 years old, with reports being made by the church that actually, there was a devil in there. They gave him the pseudonym of Ronald Doe. It seems that his aunt introduced him to an Ouija board before she died, after which the family experienced a haunting. Events got even worse as objects started flying or levitating when the boy was near. Priests were called in to exorcise him, and during the first procedure, the boy broke free of restraints. He broke a bed spring and then used it to slash a priest. The boy was taken to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, where he was placed in a psychiatric wing before his next exorcism. Doctors and nurses said that the words hell and evil appeared in marks on his body. Finally, the demon was exorcised and the hospital was later razed.
Number 10. The Smurl haunting. I know what you're thinking, it was already done. Considering it was one of their most famous cases, but surprisingly, it hasn't really been made into a movie as part of the current universe. The 1991 film The Haunting left something to be desired, so why not try again? Could it be that the name Smurl doesn't really sound that scary? Maybe. Well, the story itself is. The haunting took place in the 1970s when the family started experiencing outrageous technical mishaps, such as their TV spontaneously combusting and toilets flushing by themselves, which could be handy depending on the day you're having. But then lingering like terrible odors like sulfur and strange knocking that would always come in threes started plaguing the family. The odors would even make the family ill and would be swiftly followed by sightings. When the Warrens finally arrived, they discovered the presence of 3 different malevolent demons. Even with 3 different exorcisms, the demons kept coming back. So maybe change the name, but this has a franchise written all over it. Number 9. Vampire coffins. The Warrens Occult Museum infamously held some of the world's most dangerous demons. As a fan of the occult genre, I am itching for Ed and Lorraine to take on some kind of vampire tale, as they do have vampire coffins in their museum. So what's the story behind them, right? Like where did it come from? Most people associate the Warrens with tales of possession and poltergeist, but what about those of the toothy variety? Did they believe in them? Have they fought them before? Well, apparently the one they had in their possession was used by a real life vampire, and the couple insisted that they're real. So guys, Warren versus Dracula? Come on, film world, bring back some scary vampires, I'm in. Got my stakes ready. Number 8. Pearls of Death. Sadly, the museum I mentioned before is currently closed due to Lorraine's passing, which might be a good thing depending on how you look at it, because who's taking care of those items is my question. There are more things in there with nefarious past than your mom's bin of leftovers, the Pearls of Death being the most famous. These sound like they came straight out of Borgin and Burke's from Harry Potter. It is said that whoever wore them was strangled to death by whatever demon possessed them. Talk about clutching your pearls. How did these pearls come into their possession? Not much is known about their background, but that hasn't stopped horror writers before. Either they tie them into the Conjuring universe or build an entirely different story. I definitely think there is some untapped potential here. So let's get after it. Number 7, the Shadow Doll. Now, Patrick Wilson has already done a whole series of films based on nightmares. Insidious, another favorite of mine. But Patrick, what's one more? I think we all want to know more about the Shadow Doll, another terrifying object from their museum. This doll is literally the stuff of nightmares. The story goes that the doll slithers into your mind while you sleep and morphs your dreams into nightmares so terrifying they can stop your heart. It also looks way more frightening than the real Annabelle doll itself, which I personally think has run its course. Why not introduce another haunted doll to the directory of reasons we shouldn't own them, right? The Shadow Doll should absolutely be next on the list. We've got Chucky, Annabelle, the Shadow Doll. Perfect. Let's go. Number 6, Maurice Theroux. We're basically halfway there with this story. This story is already turned into a book and the movie should be next. Satan's Harvest by Ed and Lorraine tells the story of his possession and his Catholic exorcism. It's a really odd story with a lot of layers filmmakers could peel back to reveal an outstanding film. Maurice Theroux didn't have a very healthy childhood due to the cruelty of his father. He developed a lot of trauma specifically due to a particular obscene event in a barn, which definitely affected his mental well-being. So he prayed for salvation, which he believed he received. Maurice reported growing physically very strong, and he suddenly seemed to know things he shouldn't. When he finally settled down with his own family, he was finally considered normal and to all accounts very kind. But then he started losing chunks of his memory, and small fires started to appear across the town. Maurice committed several heinous crimes, including attempting to take his wife's life, and he also attempted suicide. But the strangest things about this are the multiple accounts of people seeing him in 2 different places at the same time. The story doesn't end here, and I'm sure the movie wouldn't either. Number 5, The Apprentice.
People used to be afraid to say stuff. I don't want somebody to think I'm nuts. That's what you would always hear. Now it is the fact where people are looking and they're searching. They want the answers.
2 words. John Zaffis. Of course, Ed and Lorraine are the names we all know and love, but what about the man on the sidelines? What did he see? John Zaffis was Ed's nephew who became a paranormal expert in his own right. He has over 43 years of experience going head to head with the demonic and the depraved. He has appeared on multiple television and radio shows to discuss cases and collects rare haunted artifacts like that of his uncle. As he got his start with the Warrens, it would be interesting to see a series of films that branch off from them, perhaps in an entirely different universe, so who knows. Number 4, The South End Werewolf. Again, yes, this is what I am waiting for. I mentioned wanting to see them tackle vampires. Werewolves, they have to be next, and there is already a case that exists. Half the work is already done, now we just need Hollywood to do its thing, make some magic happen. The South End Werewolf surrounds a man named Bill Ramsey who, when he was just 9, ripped a fence post out of the ground. When he got older, his possession caused him to admit himself to a hospital due to chest pains which he interpreted as a heart attack. While the nurse was checking on him, he fell into a rampage where people described his appearance to be very dog-like. Doctors couldn't diagnose a mental illness that suited his symptoms, so he sought help from Ed and Lorraine. He went to the US, and there they performed an exorcism that cured him, but not before several people witnessed him turn halfway into a wolf. Like, come on, this could be the next best werewolf film since Ginger Snaps, right? Like, though wildly different, very different from that movie. Number 3, the West Point haunting. Ghosts in the military? I bet producers are just waiting to pull this story into the universe, and I agree. Make it a movie on its own, why don't you? In the 70s, of course, the Warrens were called into a military academy in West Point, New York. Officers were complaining that they saw moving objects around the cabin and couldn't explain them. Lorraine sensed 2 spirits, one by the name of an Irish cook named Molly. She was particularly fond of knocking over bottles of wine and messing up freshly made beds. Then there was another named Greer, who was the spirit of a Buffalo soldier turned murderer. See, this is where it gets darker. The man was tried, but there are no records of what happened to him after the trial. See? A mystery fitting for the Conjuring universe to expand and explore? Maybe Molly puts secret messages in the stew? Who knows? Number 2, Borley Church. This is already a drama. Now we just need the flair of Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. It's also the closest reference to The Nun, but they are not directly related, which is why I think this deserves an actual retelling. The origin story of the haunting is so sad. In the 14th century, a monk fell in love with a nun at a nearby convent, and the two broke their vows and carried out an illicit affair. When they were finally caught, they were punished viciously. Far too cruelly, I should add. The monk was hanged, and the nun suffered the fate of, like, the cask of Amontillado. She was bricked up alive behind a wall, all for falling in love. This is the church where the idea for the nun arose, as Lorraine reported feeling a dark presence, and later a dark shadow in the shape of a nun was photographed near her. So I know they've done the whole nun story to death, so the whole Borley Church story might not fit in the narrative, but as a standalone, why not? Last but not least, Ed Warren's origin story, right? Okay, so this isn't actually a case file, but Ed has stated repeatedly that the reason he got into paranormal research was because of his upbringing. We've had little glimpses into his past throughout the film series, but what about a whole movie about it? Ed didn't want anyone else going through what he did, but what happened? At the age of only 5, Ed saw a glowing orb in the horrific image of a woman's face come out of his closet. The couple met when they were really young, and Lorraine didn't initially believe in ghosts, so what happened to change your mind? It would be fascinating to see an origin story for the couple that became the figurehead of the paranormal.
Starting off this countdown, we have the exorcism of Gottlieben Dittis. This is the name of a 28-year-old German woman who was said to be possessed in 1842. It all started when she began to experience paranormal activity going on in her house. Soon after the haunting started, she would slip in and out of these trance-like states. It took the priest 2 years before the demons were finally expelled from her body. So for 2 years, she was tortured by the demons inside of her. In fact, apparently she would vomit blood, glass, and nails. That sounds very painful. After a number of exorcisms, this woman was finally freed. It was revealed that she was being possessed by a widow who went crazy and murdered her family and then buried them in a field. Moving on to number 9, we have the exorcism of Gina. In 1990, a teenager from Florida by the name of Gina underwent an exorcism. In fact, her exorcism was broadcasted on the ABC network for millions of people to watch. In the end, 29 million people ended up tuning in. During the exorcism, Gina was strapped to a chair and tried to fight back a number of times. She would bark at the priest and yell out when he would press a cross against her forehead.
I therefore enjoin every unclean spirit, each devil, each partner of Satan.
As the prayers intensify, so do Gina's physical reactions. The team's doctor ties her arms and legs to the chair.
Fear and take flight at the
In the end, it was found that she was being possessed by a number of demonic spirits, including one named Zion and one named Minga. In our 8th spot today, we have the exorcism of George Lukens. In 1788, a woman named Sarah Baber reported English tailor George Lukens to the church and begged them to help him. George's behavior was very alarming to her, and she knew he was possessed. He would go into these fits where he would scream and sing loudly in different voices. He would also make inhuman noises and sing church songs backwards. On Friday the 13th of that year, 7 priests performed an exorcism on George, during which he barked and growled. In the end, the 7 priests commanded the demons in George to leave. Thankfully, it worked. All of a sudden, George snapped out of the state and said, "Bless Jesus." He then recited a prayer, and they knew the demons were finally cast out of his body. Coming in at number 7, we have Clara Germaina Seeley. In 1906, a 16-year-old from South Africa, Clara Seeley, decided to make a pact with the devil, which obviously went wrong because she ended up getting possessed. During her possession, she would behave erratically, growl, speak in tongue, exhibit superhuman strength, and would even tear the clothes off of her own body. In fact, when the priests were performing the exorcism, the holy water they splashed on her would literally burn her skin, and she even levitated in front of 170 witnesses. In the end, a noxious smell left her body, and that's when she was freed from the demon that was possessing her. Moving on to number 6, we have Michael Taylor. Sadly, this exorcism did not end well for Michael or his family. It was 1974 and Michael was a 31-year-old father of 5 children and husband to Christine Taylor. Everything was going fine until one day he just snapped. He had a huge public outburst and started screaming at everyone and was being belligerent to his wife. According to a witness, she said, and I quote, "Suddenly I glanced at Mike and his whole features changed. He looked almost beast-like. He kept looking at me and there was a really wild look in his eyes. I knew that only the name of Jesus would save me, and I just started saying over and over again, Jesus. I firmly believe that I was only by calling on his name that I was not killed." Michael ended up undergoing a number of exorcisms. One night, a bunch of priests spent hours casting out 40 demons from him. They knew there were 3 more demons inside of him: murder, madness, and violence. But they were all exhausted, so they went home and planned to resume the following day. That night, he attacked and killed his wife. Police found him shortly after, wandering the streets covered in blood. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the possession of Julia. Now, this is a fairly recent case of possession. In 2008, a woman named Julia became possessed. Apparently, Julia was the queen of a satanic cult, and one night got attacked by a demon. Immediately, she knew she needed help and went to a local priest. But the priest was like, "Hell to the no, I'm not dealing with this." And so she reached out to a psychiatrist named Richard Gallagher. Gallagher then analyzed her behavior and knew she wasn't mentally ill but was indeed possessed. During their meeting, items would fly off the shelves in his office and Julia would speak in tongue and share intimate details about Richard that she couldn't have possibly known. When she did undergo her exorcism, she got very violent. She had super strength, she levitated, and changed the temperature in the room. That's insane. In our 4th spot, we have the exorcism of Laura. This is another fairly recent case of possession. Back in 2015, a woman named Laura from Argentina became possessed. In fact, her entire exorcism was filmed. During the exorcism, we could see Laura writhing in pain and contorting her body. She also screams a number of profanities and bangs her head on the ground.
Mi alma y mi mente. Reclamo la sangre derramada del Señor Jesucristo sobre todo mi ser.
While the priests are trying to get the demons out of her, she screams "no" out loud in pain.
El campeón sobre el mar. Estoy seguro que conoce la cruz del Calvario, en la cual Satanás y todos sus poderes vinieron a ser enemigos derrotados.
The exorcism finally comes to an end when she begins crying and then falls backwards exhausted.
En el nombre de Jesús. Eso es. Ahí está. En el nombre poderoso de Jesús, gracias a la sangre de Jesús.
Thankfully, after all of this, she was freed from the demons possessing her. In our 3rd spot, we have the exorcism of Rosa. In 2015, a man named Father Amorth took on the possession case of a woman named Rosa. Rosa was in her late 30s when weird things began to happen to her. She was acting different and would constantly have outbursts. Things got so bad that her family took her to see Father Amorth. He ended up performing 9 or more exorcisms on her. During the exorcisms, Rosa's body would throb. She would thrash violently, she would foam from the mouth, and she would try to attack the bystanders. She even would talk to the father in Latin when she didn't even speak the language. In the end, the exorcism was successful, and Father Amorth determined that the cause of her possession was due to a curse that her brother's girlfriend put on her. Both her brother and the girlfriend were members of a demonic cult, and the girlfriend was a witch. In our 2nd spot today, we have Anna Eklund. This is another very famous exorcism case. Anna Anna Eklund was an American woman who in 1928 became possessed and underwent a number of exorcisms. During her exorcisms, things would happen like she would hiss or howl like an animal. She would float in the air, and whenever holy water would touch her skin, it would burn her skin right off. She would also climb up her bedroom walls and speak in tongues. This all started when she was 14 years old, but got worse as she got older. Now, the first exorcism took place when she was only 14, and it was a success, but only for a short period of time, because she became possessed again in 1928. After that, Anna underwent 30 exorcisms, but all of them failed. So they decided to send her to St. Joseph's Church in Iowa to see if they could get the demons out of her. While there, she apparently would throw up 20 to 30 times a day, and it reeked. It was so bad that nuns had to take 15-minute shifts with her, or else they would fall ill. In the end, it was discovered that Anna got possessed due to a curse that her father and her aunt put on her. How messed up is that? Her aunt was apparently a witch that mixed potions in with her food that caused her to become possessed. And in our number one spot today, we have Roland Doe. The case of Roland Doe is the true story that inspired the movie The Exorcist. It all began in the late 1940s in Washington, D.C. with a 13-year-old named Roland Doe. We don't actually know his last name, so they just gave him the last name Doe. Other people call him Ronald, so that's not his real name. Anyways, the poor boy lost his Aunt Harriet, who he loved and shared a special connection to. Shortly after her death in 1949, Roland started to experience strange things. He would hear scratching coming from the floors and walls of his room, and things around him would move on their own. Roland's family began to worry about him, so they went to a local Catholic priest for help. They then decided to perform an exorcism on Roland. Upon doing so, Roland would convulse badly. He even managed to rip out a spring from the mattress that he was strapped down on. He then took the spring and slashed one of the priests with it. A few days later, scratches began to appear all over Roland's body. In fact, at one point, an X appeared scratched into his chest. Another thing they saw was a pitchfork-shaped pattern of red lines move across his body. The marking went from the boy's thigh and moved down to his ankle. The priest, after analyzing Roland, noticed a strange pattern in his behavior. During the day, he was calm and normal, but at night, he would get wild and scream and act belligerent. Every night, Roland would undergo an exorcism. It was believed that he was possessed by 10 demons. Finally, on April 18th in 1949, the priest managed to expel Satan from his body. They shouted at Satan, saying that St. Michael would battle him for Roland's soul. 7 minutes later, Roland came out of a trance and simply said, "He's gone." After that, everything seemingly went back to normal.
Possessing our number 10 spot, we have a supermarket possession. Before I saw this video, the scariest thing that I thought can happen at a supermarket was inflation of prices, but then I came across this video. This clip is of a woman who is browsing a supermarket over in China, but suddenly she looks around and then her body becomes completely taken over by like a demonic spirit. Her head is thrown uncontrollably back and her body starts convulsing. People in the store approached her and try to help her out, but they become so scared, so all they can do is just watch from a distance and call the police. But maybe they should be calling the rain warden or maybe a priest to come perform some exorcism. I'm not sure what a police officer would do at this point. If I saw this woman possessed, like if I walk into a supermarket and I saw that, I would just turn around like it never happened and I would not shop there anymore. Indian exorcism comes onto this list at number 9. In one of the most prestigious Hindu temples in India, well, there is a locked room that holds some of the most tormented people in India. It's called the Cave of Spirits, and it is known as the last hope for people who are possessed by a demon. Several girls in a nearby village have become possessed by an unknown spirit. The families tried everything to get rid of the demon, but nothing worked. So they attempted to perform an exorcism in the temple.
One by one, the girls break down.
When the spirit comes forth, the girl loses all control over her body.
The exorcism appeared to be successful.
Mooney will leave, but the spirit that tormented her will remain here forever.
Sleep possession takes us to number 8. A young guy who has had trouble sleeping decides to record himself with a CCTV camera that detects movement and audio. For me, I never want to do this. I never ever feel the urge to record myself sleeping, just in case I actually do see something. Like, I don't want to freak myself out where I can never sleep again. Well, this guy, he wanted to see if there's anything unusual that was causing him to wake up in the middle of the night. But once he reviewed the footage, he wasn't relieved at all. Well, let's take a look at what happened. Let's take a look at what he saw. Yeah, this is exactly why I don't ever want to record myself sleeping. I don't want to know what weird things are lurking in my room, or if I'm being possessed by a sleep demon. Sometimes I have a hard time sleeping, and by sometimes I mean all the time, or I wake up tired, but I'm definitely not going to investigate why. I don't want to know that I've been possessed by like Freddy Krueger or something. Number 7, we have the exorcism of Annalise Michael. When she was 16 years old, Annalise suffered from a major seizure and was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. She was prescribed a medication, but that didn't stop her seizures. Annalise said that she kept seeing devil faces throughout the day, and she was even complaining of depression and hearing voices. The voices told her that she would rot in hell and that she was cursed. So her family began to believe that she was possessed by a demon, and they called a priest to perform an exorcism. That's when things got out of hand. Here is some audio taken from the exorcism. Unfortunately for Annalise, she was found dead in her home, and an autopsy stated that the cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. So during the exorcism, her priest and her family failed to keep her alive, and at the end of it, she only weighed 68 pounds. And it's not even clear if she was actually possessed or not. She could have just had an untreated schizophrenia. Subway possession drives us to number 6.
Oh my God.
Is this real life right now? I mean, good luck sleeping tonight. I don't even know what just happened. Apparently this footage was filmed in a subway station in San Francisco. Someone get that woman a Snickers. But all jokes aside, I really hope that people filming this called the police or told the authorities at the subway station, because she looks like she could seriously hurt herself. I think that she isn't possessed by a violent demon, then she must have snorted some like flakka, because I don't know what else this could be. I'm pretty scared from this, so let's move on. And what the heck is flakka? Who's naming these things? Pope Francis' exorcism blesses us at number 5. This footage was filmed at St. Peter's Square in Italy, and it's of Pope Francis apparently performing an exorcism. The priest that is behind the young man whispered something to the Pope, which caused him to recite an intense prayer. During the prayer, the man's mouth opens wide and he is exhaling sharply. The Vatican downplayed the incident, and they are claiming that Pope Francis just recited a prayer, but lots of people think that he performed a quick exorcism. What do you guys think? And at number 4, we have a possessed woman on a train. What is with all these possessed people riding public transportation? This is exactly why I got my license and drive a car. I'm officially freaked out. This possessed woman was filmed on a train that was in Alberta, Canada. After she looked at her cell phone, she started to act really weird, and she suddenly attacked another passenger who was sitting beside her.
Whoa. Whoa, chill.
She grabbed the man's throat and punched him with her other arm. So yeah, she was either possessed by a demon, or this is the direct result of using some drugs. Or this is the direct result of using drugs. I'll let you guys be the judge. Convenience store possession checks us into number 3. This footage is brought to us by a security camera in a convenience store. As you can see, the video was of a normal guy who just wanted to buy a drink, but then all of a sudden he began to violently shake and make strange noises. Someone needs to call a priest, because if it's not a demon, then I'm gonna guess he's going through some like Red Bull withdrawals. If we fast forward the clip to the end, the man passes out on the floor and a dark shadow appears to move in the reflection of the refrigerator door. Watch. A bloody demonic possession takes us to number 2.
Você não é poderoso. Jesus, Deus está aqui. Deus é maior do que tudo.
I literally have no idea how I'm going to sleep tonight. This video is pretty messed up. The person using their phone to film him instead of calling 911 should probably be arrested. He is clearly injured and no one is helping him. Apparently the guy has a gun wound to the face, but I think tomorrow he is going to have an extreme backache. But no, seriously, how the hell is he moving around with his back like that? This poor guy is in serious need of an exorcism, a doctor, a chiropractor. Get him something. Pope Francis, where are you at? Finally, number 1 spot, we have a really scary possession. I'm about to show you a tape that was recorded back in 1973. This footage was found in the attic of a home by the new owners, and what was found was very disturbing. Okay, what the hell was up with that creepy ass laugh? That will literally haunt me for the rest of my life. I don't think I'll ever be able to sleep again. I think we should all start a support group, because there's no way I'll ever be able to get over this. So the support group will be for me and for you guys watching this as well. And as always, if you guys want to watch the entire clip, I'll make sure to link it in the description below, but don't say I didn't warn you.
Number 10. Click, click, slide. One night in a small town not too far from where you are now, a woman, Sally, was late to pick up her daughter from a school basketball game. The reason she was late was because she'd stopped to get a manicure and long new acrylic nails put on at the salon. While she was rushing to the school, her car stalled out on the train tracks, and suddenly she saw a bright light and heard the train's horn as it collided with her car. The car was destroyed, and the only piece of her body that was found were her legs. The whole town was abuzz the next day with the mystery of what had happened, but at 6:30, the same time the train killed Sally, all of the young people in the town heard 3 strange noises. Click, click, slide, over and over again. It seemed to move all the way from one side of town to the other, from the train tracks to the school. Originally, people were wary of what was going on, so they walked together in groups, but every night they heard it. Click, click, slide. And after a while, the townspeople were terrified, and no one went outside alone after dark, especially if you weren't a grown-up. One night, young Emma was sitting in her living room with her mother when her mom asked her, "Emma, I haven't been feeling well. Would you go to the store and pick up some medicine for me?" Emma looked worried and said, "But Mom, it's almost 6:30. And her mother shrugged it off, saying it's just an old story and that she needed to grow up. So off Emma went to the store, but on her way back, as night fell, sure enough she heard the noise. Click, click, slide, click, click, slide, and she looked behind her but saw nothing. She quickened her pace as she walked home, and behind her, getting louder, click, click, slide. And as she got closer to home, the sounds were practically in her ear. Click, click, slide. And as she reached her front door, she turned around to see the mangled torso of a woman dragging herself with her long nails along the ground towards her. Click, click, slide. Emma pounded on the door and begged to be let inside, but her mother had locked the door and fallen asleep. And behind her, louder than ever, she heard click, click, slide. The next morning, the mother couldn't find Emma, and when she opened the front door to look for her, all that she saw was a trail of blood going down the stairs, and a message scrawled in blood on the front steps that read, "Why didn't you open the door, Mother?" I can already imagine the special effects makeup on Sally. Number 9. The Keyhole. Our next tale is a bit more simple and would be some slow build horror for sure, but some of my favorite scary movies are like that. A man comes into town on business. All of the hotels in the area are booked up for the holidays, so he decides to check into a less than savory hotel, as it's the only one with a vacancy sign on. When the front desk worker gives him his key, she says that on his floor there is a locked room with no number on it, and that he must stay out of it at all costs. Agreeing, he heads to his room, and as he does, he walks by the room with no number. He almost knocks, but decides against it and goes to bed. bed. The next night, as he's returning to his room, he walks by the door and sees that the keyhole is rather wide, as though the lock was from a very long time ago. And he crouches down and looks inside. He sees a room much like his own, but in the back corner, there's a woman with skin as white as snow, crying with her head against the wall. He almost knocks, but decides against it. The next night, the man decides to look through the keyhole one more time to check on the woman, but all he sees when he looks through is the color red. She must have blocked the door with a red scarf or tape or something, he thinks to himself. When he checks out, he confesses to the front desk worker that he'd looked through the keyhole into the room. She sighs and tells him that they don't rent the room anymore because a man murdered his wife in there many years ago, and when the police found her body, she'd been strangled and beaten so hard that her eyes had filled with blood, and they turned completely red. Number 8. The King of Hearts. Modern playing cards are filled with meanings and symbols based in truth, like the 4 suits being representative of the 4 seasons, or the 52 cards representing the number of weeks in the year, and the kings are all based on real rulers, and the King of Hearts represents the emotionally disturbed Charles VII of France. King Charles fell ill near the end of his life, and it was at this time that he became obsessed with numerology and playing cards, as he knew his face was already immortalized in their ink. He began to obsess over the fact that the king was the 13th card of any suit, and that it would bring him terrible misfortune. He started to see the number everywhere, and it eventually drove him mad. One day, one of his butlers went to the king's room to feed him, and found King Charles wielding a sword, proclaiming that the cards have shown me the truth of 13, and it's not meant for mortal eyes. And he then thrust the sword into the left side of his head, and it came out on the other side. His playing card was changed to depict the grisly way he died, and check for yourself. On many decks of cards, the King of Hearts has a sword in the left side of his head. It's even creepier that he chose to end his life on 7/6/1462, with 7 and 6 making 13, and the numbers of the year also adding up to 13. Makes you wonder if the number really did have some strange power. Number 7. The Cremation of Sam McGee. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge where I cremated Sam McGee. This is the beginning of one of my most favorite poems of all time. Written by Robert W. Service, this creepy poem tells the story of 2 men who are on an Arctic expedition, and unfortunately, Sam passes away from the cold. The poem follows Sam's friend's journey, bringing his frozen dead body through the ice and snow to fulfill Sam's last wish, to be cremated, so that he could feel like he's warm and back at home in the South one last time. I won't spoil the rest, but I believe that there's enough of a story to make a movie here. To be following one man's struggle through the Arctic to see his friend's dying wish come true would be a pretty compelling film, not to mention the unexpected twists. Johnny Cash actually does a fantastic reading of it if you're so inclined to listen. Number 6. A Ride Home. Now there are many different versions of this story, and some of them have been documented in real life by real people. One version is called The Witch of White Rock Lake. Another is called The Lady in White, but as the story goes, one night a woman was driving home after a long night shift, and due to some rain, the main road was out, so she needed to take a detour down an old dirt road that goes by the lake. As she's driving, she suddenly sees a woman in a white dress standing in the middle of the road. She stops the car, and as the woman in white approaches, she sees that they are absolutely drenched, head to toe. The woman comes to the window and, weeping, she asks for a ride home, saying that her boat capsized on the lake and that she needs to get home to her family. The driver says, "Of course, get in and tell me where you need to go." The lady in white gets in the back seat and gives her an address. It's not too far from where they are now, and they drive off into the night. After a little while, the driver asks for some clarification on the directions, but when she turns around, the woman is nowhere to be seen, but the seat is soaking wet. She decides to finish the journey to the address and arrives at a house. She knocks on the door and a man answers. She tells him about the woman in white and how she gave her this address and then disappeared. The man said, "You're the 5th person to knock on my door and tell me this story. 5 years ago tonight, my wife and I were sailing on the lake and we had a terrible accident and she drowned. She's been pleading for help ever since." Number 5. The Seventh Barn. Now, I think that this next one could be great on the silver screen, but not necessarily because of how scary it is, but because you could lean into the investigation angle and how obsession can drive people to do all sorts of crazy things. There was once a wealthy farmer who loved his wife so much that he bought her a heck of a lot of land as a wedding present. When they had a child, the husband decided to celebrate the occasion by building a barn and putting a plaque on it with their name. Every time the man and his wife had a child, he did this, and eventually they had 6 barns and 6 children. children, and they were happy. When his wife announced that she was pregnant again, he was overjoyed and began construction on the 7th barn, and the day that he finished, she went into labor. Unfortunately, his wife died in childbirth, and so did their unborn son. Driven mad by grief and heartbreak, the man took the rest of his family out to the 7th barn to bury his wife and son, he told them. But then, he took an axe and killed all of them and hung himself from the rafters. They say if you visit the barn at night, you can see his ghostly figure hanging by his neck, blowing in the wind. And over the years, the land and barns were sold off, all but the 7th, as everyone knew of the tragedy that happened there. But a teacher told his son the scary story, and they decided to try to find the 7th barn. They scoured old maps, toured through the countryside and plains, and finally found what they thought was the 7th barn. It even had the nameplate on the outside, and they headed out there with a video camera to get some paranormal evidence. The next morning, the teacher's wife reported the son and husband missing, and the cops found their car abandoned on the side of the road near a barn. And when they looked inside, they saw their bodies hung by the neck from the rafters, blowing in the wind. Number 4, Knock. Now, making this next one into a feature-length film would be interesting, not necessarily because of the content, but for the lack thereof. This was published in 1948, written by an author named Frederick Brown, and it's not your normal ghost story, but the shortest horror story ever written. To make this a movie, I think you'd have to start long before the events take place and build the world up. It's only 2 sentences, and it goes like this. The last man on earth sat alone at the room. There was a knock on the door. Simple, short, and spooky. Number 3, Lick. One night, a young woman was home alone. Her roommates were out of town for the night, and she had the run of the place. She watched TV and ate junk food all evening, but when the night came, there was a terrible thunderstorm, and despite the fact that she should have grown out of it, she was still afraid of the dark, and the shadows, lightning, and noises in an empty house scared her half to death. Luckily, she had her faithful dog Spot to take care of her, and he curled up next to her on the bed and licked her hand to comfort her, and she fell asleep. In the middle of the night, she woke up to a noise, something that was dripping. Maybe some rain was leaking in, or a tap wasn't fully off, but she heard it loud and clear. Drip, drip, drip. The lightning and shadows and sounds scared her, but Spot licked her hand for comfort and she fell back asleep. An hour later, she woke up and heard the noise again. Drip, drip, drip. She wondered if she should go check on it, but she was too frightened from the shadows and the lightning. Spot licked her hand for comfort, and again she fell asleep. She woke one more hour later to the same noise. Drip, 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 and this time she gathered her courage and went to investigate. She followed the sound around her house until she realized it was coming from the bathroom, which she must have left the tap on. She opened the door and saw something horrible. Spot was hanging upside down from the shower rod, and he had been skinned. There was still some blood falling from his body, hitting the floor with a drip, drip, drip. Terrified, she ran back to her room to call the police, but inside she saw a note scrawled on the wall in blood, and it said, "Humans can lick too." As someone who grew up with a dog that slept on their bed, this one terrified me, and I'd like to see it on the big screen. Number 2, Red Ribbon. Now this one was probably one of my favorite horror stories growing up, as it was featured in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Although it was a green ribbon, I prefer it with red. I'm not sure if it's the scariest, but there's a lot of stuff that you could take from here to make a pretty compelling movie. Bill loved Sally with all of his heart, common name for horror stories I guess, but there was always something off about her. Even as he fiddled with the engagement ring in his pocket, he thought so. And every day, no matter what, she had a red ribbon tied around her neck. He proposed and she accepted, and later he asked about the ribbon, and she replied with, "Bill, I must never take off my red ribbon, and if you love me, you'll never ask me about it again." And he left it alone. Over the years, he bought her many beautiful outfits, but no matter what she was wearing, even on their wedding day, she wore the red ribbon tied neatly in a bow around her neck. And the question began to eat away at him. On their anniversary, he bought her a beautiful necklace, thinking that she would have to remove the ribbon to wear it, but when he went to remove it so he could put the necklace around her neck, she said, "The necklace is beautiful and she'll treasure it forever, but I must never take off my red ribbon." This angered him slightly, but he let it go. When their baby was born, it was the happiest moment of his life, but the question came back to him when the baby reached his hand towards the thing tied around its mother's neck, and Sally said sweetly to her new baby, "No, Mommy must never take off her red ribbon." Many nights later, the question he was never to ask had burrowed deep into his mind, and it was driving him mad. So while Sally was sleeping, he slowly reached over and pulled at both sides of the bow on the pretty red ribbon. And just as it finally came loose, Sally's eyes opened and her head rolled off of her neck and onto the floor. With a single tear rolling down her cheek, she cried, "I warned you." And finally, number 1, don't turn on the light. I think this one is so scary because for some reason it feels the most realistic, and I can already see the trailer in my head. Miranda and Lucy were roommates and went to school at the local college. One night Lucy comes home and tells Miranda that they've been invited to a big party and that they need to get ready to go. Miranda says she's not feeling well and that she's gonna have a nap on the couch instead. Lucy heads to the party, but halfway through her walk she realizes she's forgotten her keys. Classic Lucy. When she gets back to her apartment, she opens the very creaky door slowly so that she doesn't make too much noise. She can hear steady, slow breaths, so she decides to not turn on the lights so she doesn't wake up her sleeping friend. She knows the place like the back of her hand, so it's no problem. She walks through the apartment in the dark, quietly, grabs her keys, and heads back out the door to the party. She dances all night, and later, exhausted, she walks back up the stairs to her apartment and sees the door wide open. She runs inside but can't see anything in the dark, so she flicks the switch on the wall, and when the room brightens, she sees Miranda, mangled and covered in blood in the middle of the floor. Lucy lets out a blood-curdling scream, and then she sees the mirror on the wall, and on it was a message scrawled in Miranda's blood, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?"